For the very first time, we are celebrating the Reverend Awdry's work with a special Diorama challenge.
Challenge accepted. Hi guys. So, the hashtag Awdry Diorama Challenge. I knew as soon as I saw this that I had to have a go. But I needed to decide on a scene. I narrowed it down to, well, narrow gauge, so I skimmed through the Skarloey books. There are a few that I shortlisted. Pictures with Peter Sam in would have been a good option as I have the spare body from the Chorus Tattoo project. But in the end, I decided on this one from the Little Old Engine. I believe it's based on the Aberglacian Pass on the Welsh Highland, and it's got a lot of interest, with a few figures to add some life. My idea is to view the diorama through a picture frame. And mocking up the scene, it looks like it will be just right. To start, I'll trim the polystyrene base to A4 dimensions. And start to map out the scene. I'll put the track on an angle so it doesn't feel so static, and I'll fine tune it as I go along. Drawing along the front also helps, especially around a river. Obviously, polystyrene is terribly delicate and flakes off, so I'll cut out a fascia for the front from Foamex. This material is tough, but it can be cut with a knife. The landscape can now be cut to shape. I'm still using the good old kitchen knife as I haven't got round to buying a new hot foam cutter yet. I'll try and get the riverbed as level as possible to aid the resin pour. Polystyrene is built up for the rocks behind the track, and this can be glued together with copy decks. I'll now glue on the fascia, and again copy decks is a good option as it doesn't eat the foam. I want to get the rocks ready, so out comes the rock mould. This was from Woodland Scenics and they do a range of different rock formations. A mix of filler is made up. I'm aiming for a consistency similar to whipped cream. A spray of water into the mould and the filler is spooned in. Whilst that's setting, I'll move on to the bridge abutments. Looking at the picture, these are large blocks, and Slaters luckily make an embossed plasticard very similar to this. I'll cut the main shape out and score lines for the corners, which can then be easily bent. I add a little square of plasticard for strength, as this embossed stuff is thin and bends, which are not exactly attributes of a strong structure. Topping stones are also cut out, slightly larger than the embossed block in to give a bit of overhang. Filing the edges also helps to age the stonework a little. These are then glued on. Superglue is fine here and gives an instant bond. I brush Tamiya pavement cement into the corners to fill the bend lines, which really helps add a bit of realism, as I find bend and join lines really ruin the look of a good model, so I try to hide these as much as possible. A wet cotton bud can now be used to clean up the sides before the pavement cement dries too much. Oh look, the rocks are ready. There is a crack down the centre from when I picked it up, but this really isn't an issue as I break it into pieces to fit the diorama. I want to give a solid coat for the polystyrene base ready for scenics, and I've opted for this modelling compound. It's basically chewed up paper mache, and you mix it with water to form a sort of porridge mix, which I hate. The porridge, that is, not the modelling compound, it's brilliant. This can be spread on with utensils or your hands. If it gets too dry, and it does dry quickly, spray it with a bit of water. I add a little at a time, working my way around the layout. I also go right over the top of the Foamex fascia so the scenery will come all the way to the front of the diorama. I've now placed the bridge abutments in their final resting place, as the modelling compound will hold them there. This stuff also gives a good waterproof layer for the resin water, so there's very little chance of leaks. And resin is the last thing you want to leak. Well, second after carbon monoxide, but I'm not planning to use that on the diorama. The rocks have been added to the hillside. These were literally glued on with modelling compound. I can then fill the gaps between the rock pieces with more filler. Before this dries, I grab a stiff brush and shape the filler joins to connect the rock pieces. When it's all painted, it'll be hard to see that there are any joins at all. When it's all dry, the whole diorama is sprayed black, which gives a good base to add the scenery and paint onto. Whilst that's drying off, I move on to the bridge itself. So the deck of the bridge is going to be built the same way as the chorus layout, matchsticks cut to the correct width and glued together. Paper and card glue works well for matchsticks and gives a bit of time to correct any mistakes along the way. The deck is then sprayed with earth brown. I try to spray it in lines across the deck and go over some parts more than others to vary the colouring. This can then be dry brushed with light antique white, which gives the wood a good aged appearance. You don't want to overdo it with the white, and I've got probably about 5% of the paint left on the brush at this point, which keeps it dry. Finally, the wood gets a coat of black wash by ammo. This is enamel and settles in the wood grain and gives a really realistic finish. Considering how fast and easy this step is, it makes a huge difference. The metal parts of the bridge are now cut out from square plaster strut. A bit of trial and error on the dimensions here to get something like the picture in the book. And if you've noticed the glass slab, I tend to glue on this as it's completely flat. The main shape is dry, so I'll now add some diagonal pieces. Again, these are just made following the book's illustration. And I'm going by the rule of if it looks right, it is right. So I think it is right as it looks right. I've also added little square corner brackets with rivet detail on them, and the whole thing is sprayed grey. The picture doesn't look like raw metal, so I was aiming for the colour of grey primer. And for a bit of weathering, the structure is dry brushed with a slightly lighter grey from above. This almost looks like staining from rain and weather, and gives a bit of interest to the piece. And finally, for a bit of realism, the bridge has patches of light rust added, not too much as I wanted to keep it close to the book. Right, that'll do for today. Next up will be the scenics. And if you haven't had enough of my voice, watch these videos as they have some useful tips for layout building. Cheers!